It's a format as to where you could potentially peak at the right time. And I think City still have the opportunity, Chris.
Here's what it looks like coming up. They're into the knockout round of the playoffs. They're in 22nd is how they finish in this Champions League phase. 3 places above that drop zone. They have Arsenal away next in the Premier League. Then they're away at Leyton Orient in the FA Cup. And then these are the possible knockout round opponents. We'll explain this a lot over the course of the show. The draw is seeded this year, meaning it is related to where you finish in that league table. And because they finish in 22nd, they will play either Real Madrid, who finished in 11th, or Bayern Munich, who finished in 12th. We could have an absolute blockbuster knockout round tie in the next stage.
Listen, I'd love to say congratulations also to Club Brugge, who sneaked themselves in there to the playoffs. So congratulations to them. They somehow got the job done. But for Manchester City, finishing in the position they did, 22nd in the table, there's no way anyone, as a City fan, can be happy with that type of action in the Champions League, especially when it's this new format, 8 match days, and yet you finish that low in the standings. It's disappointing, and now you've left yourself somewhat of a mountain to climb to really put yourself in contention to win this trophy. I can't imagine that there's any team out there right now fearing this Manchester City team. They watched the action in the first 45 minutes. Not one single shot on target. Pep Guardiola is forced to make a change. He brings on, obviously, Savinho for Gundogan. And then he has some sort of impact in the second half. You would expect that because of the quality that City have in their ranks. They can make changes, impact games, and then go on and win in the second half. But no one's watching this Manchester City side and are scared right now. So I fear for Manchester City, certainly as they go forward with these 2 big giants waiting for them.
That said, we were preparing the Manchester City funeral for this era. They won 4 straight Premier Leagues and won a Champions League in this era, but we saw in that first half them really struggle. Do you think the January signings that they brought in, they'll be able to join up with the team in the knockout phase? Is there any life to be refound in this team? Is there still life in this season yet for Manchester City?
Listen, I still think Manchester City are trying to deal with what they've gone through over the last 3 or 4 years. They've been chasing that Champions League trophy for a period of time. They eventually won it, went on to win yet again another Premier League title. They look kind of knackered this season, City. I think that's caught up with them. Obviously, injury bug has caught up with them as well. And I feel for Pep Guardiola in that regard, especially when you lose one of your best players, certainly most influential players in Rodri in that midfield area. He's not only a quality player, I think we can both agree with that. He's a world-class leader in that midfield, and he's a leader in the locker room as well. I think the injuries have caught up with them. I think obviously fatigue's caught up with them. City nowhere near at their best. And every team right now in European football is trying to get to that standard. They're trying to peak at some point in the season where they can still be competitive. The only positive I'm taking from it, and not even this result, the only positive I'm taking from it is that City are still in this. Who wants to play Manchester City? I think, as I mentioned already there before, City are not at their best. No one would really fear them. But Manchester City are still Manchester City.
It's still not a team you want to play in the last 24 of the Champions League.
You think of the money they've just spent.
Yeah.
And as you pointed out there, these players can't be active, obviously, in the group stage, but they can be active in the knockout stages, and I'm looking forward to seeing Omar Marmoush impact.
Now, I think one of the things we're still trying to get a handle on is the new format of the Champions League. I wanted to ask you, because we saw Man City really struggle for, let's say, 7.5 games. They figured it out in the second half of this last game. Drew against Feyenoord. They were losing at halftime of this game. They lost in the last game to PSG. Is the format too forgiving for clubs like Manchester City, who only got 11 points from 8 games and yet are still through to the knockout round of the Champions League?
Listen, I think when you look at the format, the ones who are benefiting from this is UEFA. UEFA financially are benefiting from it. The teams are benefiting from it because there's more home games. Obviously, you can get more money involved, and I think there's more TV revenue out there as well for clubs. So I understand why they would want to do this. I think the fans sometimes suffer because the product on the field is not necessarily at its peak standard. It's not necessarily elite level every single Champions League game that you watch. I mean, 25 years ago, when you had 6 games going into a Champions League group stage, every game was a cup final. Sure, every team was competing because they were the champion of their nation. Now you've got multiple teams who are from your nation competing in the Champions League. It's a format as to where you could potentially peak at the right time. And I think City still have the opportunity, Chris. I mean, we must not forget, this is still one of the best managers ever to have been on the sidelines in our game, in Pep Guardiola. He's got to have a game plan. But at some point, that game plan has to come to fruition. Because I watch them watching Manchester City right now. They're not enjoyable to watch. They don't play the same style of football they did. I don't necessarily recognise some sort of identity with Pep's team right now. They're just hoping to win games. They're not going out there knowing they're going to win games anymore.
And Man City are through to the next stage. Again, it will be either Real Madrid or Bayern Munich in that knockout round.
That's crazy.
Right. It would be an absolutely glamour tie no matter who they play. Now, if you're looking at it from Real or Bayern perspective, they could either draw Celtic or Manchester City. One imagines you probably would rather have Celtic going into that next stage. But when you look at this City side, is this potentially kind of that everyone rediscovering their identity and that, okay, we can still, in the biggest occasion, turn it on, second half, turn in a performance, score 3 goals, and flex our muscles and remind ourselves of who we are? Is this that kind of moment for this club?
Yeah, but how long are you going to wait for them to actually turn it on? I mean, if you look at the starting 11 they put out with today, obviously there's an enormous amount of strength in that squad and certainly world-class players. It's lovely to see, obviously, John Stones back in along that back four. He had a couple of assists in the game today and probably was Manchester City's best player. Not necessarily great coming from midfield from Gundogan. Mateo Kovačić with his goal was excellent, even though Mignolet should have done a lot better. We didn't see enough productivity from Phil Foden, even though he was good in possession of the ball. Creativity-wise, we wanted to see a little bit more from him. And Erling Haaland just obviously desperate to try and get himself some chances. Had one shot on target. So to try and get it all to come together seems to be Pep Guardiola's problem right now. This is still an immense talented 11 that they've put out there. Regardless of the injuries, kids on the bench, you still have players who can come on and have an impact. Obviously, Jack Grealish has been frustrated. He's the one who's pushed out. You know, Savinho is the one who's come on and had the impact in today's game. But with the new players being added, Golazo obviously along that back line will be an interesting addition. Let's see how he pans out. It's not been a great start for him. But Omar Mamouche is the one that everyone's sort of turning their attention to. Can he be the one that can change the fortunes of this Manchester City side? But I do believe that City have gone through fatigue. They're still trying to work their way back. I thought they were actually starting to rebound. And then I watched that first 45 minutes and I started to fear the worst for Manchester City. At one point, they were going out of this competition, which would have been hell. Then we would have been asking questions as to why Pep Guardiola is still in charge.
Right, and I think for a club like Manchester City, I don't think there's any other big club in Europe that would have gone out of the competition at this stage and not had real questions. But Guardiola has obviously done a magnificent amount of work and quality of work as well. Do you think they need more in January if they're to kick on and get something out of this knockout phase? We're talking about playing Bayern or Real Madrid the next round. They're going to have to raise their level several levels, it would seem.
I do worry about what they've got at that right full-back position, obviously, in the centre-back position as well. I know they've brought Kuzanov in. He's a youngster, only 22 years old, so he's still going to have to improve and develop, and they have to be patient with that type of development. John Stones coming back is great. It's great to see him back in that starting 11. But I think City have got so much at their disposal right now. They seem to want to throw money at this problem and want to try and get a team that can be competitive between now and the end of the season in the Premier League, but also trying to get into that top four is not going to be easy for them. There is a lot of teams in the Premier who are playing well right now. I still think their goal is the Champions League. Manchester City should be focused on this Champions League. So I'd be watching out for City, regardless of the big guns that they may face in this next round in the playoffs. I'm really intrigued to see how City improve from here, because they're going to have to do a hell of a lot of improving if they're going to get to the final and potentially win it.
I'm not sure too many people would have anticipated a 22nd place finish in this league phase, but it's just been that kind of season for Manchester City.